Next guest says the U.S. is trapped in a cycle of zombie engagement with Beijing, in which America tries to keep talking, and China keeps doing pretty much whatever it wants. Joining us right now is Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin. He chairs the Select Committee on China in the House. So what do you think the answer is? To disengage?
No, I think it is to, first of all, dramatically enhance our military deterrent, particularly across the Taiwan Strait, so that we prevent a conflict. And right now, I worry about the increasing risks of conflict, which you guys know better than anyone would be incredibly devastating economically. But then, and perhaps most difficult, is to get about this business of selectively decoupling. I say selectively decoupling in key areas so that at a minimum, we can start to reduce the leverage that the Chinese Communist Party has over us. What I'm worried about, as I allude to in this op-ed, like a zombie in a horror movie rising from the grave, is that we're going back to this idea that we can engage with China and induce them to act responsibly, but instead we see rising aggression across the board. And our fear of provoking Xi Jinping leads us to self-deter. It leads us to shelve key defensive measures that we need to take. And beyond the fact that engagement as a core pillar of our strategy has not worked for 30 years, the problem with this zombie engagement, in my opinion, is that the Chinese Communist Party exploits our ardent pursuit of meetings and photo ops as an opportunity to advance their totalitarian and often anti-American agenda. So when filtered through the ideology of a Marxist-Leninist regime, that olive branch we constantly extend becomes an invitation to aggression. So we need to be smart, we need to be strong, but we can't get lulled back into this idea that economic engagement will somehow induce the CCP to become a responsible stakeholder.
Congressman, but what ultimately do you want? Is it a fear that they are going to ultimately do something demonstrably damaging to the United States? Is this a issue about democracy and human rights that you think that we are supposed to be succeeding and we're not? What is it?
It's primarily, well, in the near term, my concern, as I alluded to at the beginning, is about the risks of a conflict. I mean, look at Ukraine to be reminded of the fact that, as the old saying goes, war is hell. Deterrence is hard, but war is hell. So a conflict with China over Taiwan, even one in which the free world is able to deny them from establishing a lodgment on the island, would be incredibly destructive. So deterrence is the near-term goal. Over the long term, my concern is for democracy, it's for freedom, it's for our ability to say what we want without fear of an economic retaliation by China. It's increasing economic coercion across the board. It's the perfection of a techno-totalitarian regime that we're seeing play out in Xinjiang and all across China, and that model being exported around the world. It's what your co-host alluded to before. It's their ambition for global domination, and a world in which China sets the rules as opposed to the United States is a very dark world that we do not want to live in.
How concerned, though, are you that right now the risk for American businesses to increase their business and potential business opportunities in China is being limited not by China, but by their fear of the government in the United States?
I don't agree with the premise. I mean, look at what China's just done in recent months. They raided the PRC offices of 3 separate American firms. They targeted Micron in an effort to destroy its China business. They rebuffed Secretary Austin's attempts to establish a crisis communication channel, and they nearly collided with American forces in the air and at sea during unprofessional attempts. I think we have to realize that for years now, it is the Chinese Communist Party which has been trying to decouple from us, from the rules-based international order. What is made in China 2025, but a very intense and sophisticated strategy for decoupling? I'm reminded of a framework that a Chinese author laid out for decoupling. First, wean yourself off critical dependencies. Second, make sure your foreign adversaries can't spread their propaganda through digital platforms. Third, don't let adversarial governments buy up frontier technologies or critical infrastructure like ports. The author of that proposal was a policy wonk named Xi Jinping. That is the strategy he is pursuing right now. So we need to recognize it and counter it. Ours is a defensive strategy against their aggression.
So when you see Bill Gates sitting with the president of China, do you look at him and say, what a mistake? He's some kind of, entrepreneurial traitor? I mean, I'm so curious sort of how you think about the American businessmen who are now making their way to China. Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan recently. Tim Cook, obviously, at Apple has a huge business in China. Nike, huge business in China. What do you make of the work that they're doing and the positions they've taken?
First of all, I have not, and I would not question anybody's loyalty. I understand that the business community has a different view than I do. On balance, so I think some people are waking up. All I'm asking is that they recognize a few things. One, that it would make sense for us to stop funding our own destruction, that American capital continuing to flow into China, particularly where it's invested in Chinese military companies or technology companies that are being used to perpetrate a genocide, that's bad for us. That's funding our own destruction. The second, let's just take off the golden blindfolds when it comes to doing business with China and at least recognize the risk. I recognize that supply chains or rebalancing or de-risking isn't going to happen overnight, but what are the risks of your assets being seized in the event of China making a move to take Taiwan? What are the risks of VIE securities without shareholder protections? Let's just have an honest conversation about that so we can protect Americans from their exposure. And finally, yes, and this is where we in the United States need to figure a few difficult things out, and we need to talk to each other and come up with a coherent, lasting framework. How do we reclaim our economic independence in key areas? We're experimenting when it comes to semiconductor technology right now. I'm skeptical that unless we have aggressive regulatory reform, it may not work. But what's the solution when it comes to advanced pharmaceutical ingredients, when it comes to rare earth and critical mineral mining and processing, when it comes to energetics? That selective part of decoupling, figuring out how we onshore or nearshore is critical. One final point, I'm sorry to go on. I concede that you cannot de-risk or selectively decouple without simultaneously increasing your engagement and your economic and technological partnership with other countries, allies, partners, and people that don't fit neatly within the free world. That two-part process is critical to our success over the long term.
Whoa.
Wow.
This guy.
There's a lot going on.
No, but he's, wow, you're in the House, Congressman? That's, holy cow.
I'm too young to be in the Senate. I can't.
No, I know.
They wouldn't let me in to the early bird breakfast special.
Got to be in the. Where'd you go to school? Were you in the top quintile? What? Got any notes?
I mean, he won the debate club. That we know.
Yeah, no doubt.
I'm just a kid from Northeast Wisconsin. All right, it's Wisconsin common sense. That's all I'm asking for.
Very good,
Congressman. We appreciate you.